Right now, a secret audio recording sits locked inside a sealed court file, and Blake Lively is fighting harder than ever to make sure the public never hears it. What's on that tape could upend everything she's claimed about Justin Baldoni, but here's the twist. The man who was recorded without his consent is the one demanding it be released. Blake built her case around allegations of verbal abuse, grabbing headlines overnight, yet now she's desperate to bury the very proof she submitted. Meanwhile, Steve Sawitz, whose voice appears on that recording, is begging the court to unseal every word. It's a bizarre reversal. The accused asking for transparency, while the accuser hides behind confidentiality. When someone secretly records you, edits the quotes, and uses them to destroy your reputation, wouldn't you want the full truth out? This isn't just another Hollywood lawsuit. It's a battle over narrative control and the power of selective evidence. Blake got her moment of outrage. The headlines, the sympathy, the viral stories about toxic behavior. But what happens if the full conversation tells a different story? What if the person she secretly recorded is armed with the one weapon she fears most? Context? That audio could either end Justin Baldoni's reputation for good or expose Blake Lively as someone willing to weaponize a recording to manipulate the media. And judging by how aggressively she's fighting to keep it sealed, it's not hard to guess which outcome she's afraid of. A week ago, Blake thought she'd executed the perfect legal strike. She filed a sealed declaration demanding triple damages, accusing Baldoni's lawsuit of being retaliation. Under California Law 47.1, victims who face backlash for making credible assault claims can collect treble damages, an enormous payout if they can prove their story. Bold move. Except what was meant to protect her may now destroy her case. Hidden within that filing is testimony from an anonymous witness, someone her legal team insists must remain confidential for safety reasons. Standard language. Except this witness reportedly provided the explosive recording of Steve Sawitz, one of the main defendants. The timing couldn't be more suspect. Blake files the declaration, headlines explode, and suddenly the mystery tape becomes the most talked about secret in Hollywood. The question now isn't whether the recording exists, it's what happens when the court decides the world deserves to hear it. Blake Lively accused Justin Baldoni of verbal abuse, then immediately moved to seal nearly every detail of her evidence behind privacy laws. She wanted the shock value of headlines without the scrutiny of context, the damage without accountability. Her court filing was so heavily redacted it looked like a classified intelligence document, blacked out paragraphs, missing pages, and only fragments visible. Mentions of a conversation with Steve Sawitz, allegations of verbal aggression, and references to an audio recording with precise timestamps. Blake had given the world just enough to spark outrage, but not enough for anyone to verify what actually happened. Wayfair Studios, representing Sawitz, noticed immediately that something didn't add up. They had no issue protecting an anonymous witness. That's standard practice. Their concern was much larger. The supposed smoking gun recording featured their client, and he had never consented to being recorded. Now, his private words were being used against him, weaponized by selective editing, while the full audio remained hidden from both the public and the court itself. What Blake didn't expect was Sawitz's counterpunch. Instead of denying or downplaying the recording, he demanded full transparency. He wanted every second of that conversation made public. Because when someone secretly records you and releases edited sound bites that destroy your reputation, the only way to defend yourself is with the full truth. That declaration, presented as legal evidence, was really a media strategy disguised as a filing. Blake had used the judicial system as a megaphone, creating headlines, shaping a narrative, and then invoking confidentiality laws to block anyone from fact-checking her claims. But what happens when the person you secretly recorded fights back with the one thing you fear most, the unedited version of your own evidence? The mystery witness may have believed they were strengthening Blake's case. In reality, they may have handed her opponents the very proof that unravels it. Because when you record someone without consent, and that person demands transparency, your selective edits become everyone's business. And Wayfair's lawyers found something that turned Blake's entire strategy on its head. Their legal response revealed the truth behind the so-called abuse tape. According to Wayfair's filing, the recording did capture Sawitz's voice during a private exchange with Blake's anonymous witness, but only fragments of the audio had been shared. Blake's team submitted brief, dramatic snippets stripped of context, designed to sound like verbal aggression. What they didn't share were the minutes before and after, the part of the conversation that could completely change its meaning. Think about how this unfolded. Someone, acting on Blake's behalf, secretly recorded Sawitz during what he believed was a private discussion. That audio was then delivered to Blake's legal team, who cherry-picked the most incriminating lines, inserted them into her declaration, and filed the excerpts to the court, immediately generating headlines about abuse. Then, just as the media frenzy peaked, her team moved to seal the full recording from public access. She wanted the impact, not the investigation. But her own filing confirmed the existence of exact time codes, minute and second markers, proving the audio was real and complete. Those same timestamps also prove that Blake's team had the entire recording, not just pieces. When someone possesses full evidence but releases only fragments, it's usually because the whole version contradicts their story. Wayfair's response was devastating. In their motion, they accused Blake's team of secretly recording their client without consent, using those edited clips to destroy his reputation, and hiding behind privacy laws to avoid accountability. Their position was clear. Release the full tape. Let the public hear what Steve Sawitz actually said, not the cut-down version crafted to fit a media narrative. Then came the most suspicious detail of all. In her own filing, Blake admitted that releasing the recording could cause her adverse media exposure. That line alone was telling. She wasn't worried about privacy or safety. She was worried about optics. She'd already engineered a PR storm by releasing selective quotes, yet now claimed that transparency would be harmful. So which was it? She wanted publicity when it served her, but secrecy when the facts might contradict her story. The abuse claims might sound damning in isolation, but the context, what was said before and after, could tell a very different story. What if the abuse was part of a heated professional disagreement, or even a provoked argument? What if the tone Blake described as aggressive was, in reality, defensive? Those are the details her team is fighting to bury. Wayfair's filing goes further, accusing her of evidence manipulation, of constructing a narrative by extracting inflammatory sound bites, feeding them to the press, and using sealed record laws as a shield to avoid scrutiny. That's not building a case. That's manufacturing a storyline. And the more investigators examined the timeline, the more suspicious it became. When exactly was this recording made? Was it before Blake's initial accusations, or afterward? As part of a setup to strengthen her case? Did she instruct or influence the anonymous witness to initiate the recording? The sealed sections of her declaration reportedly contain those crucial details, and they're the parts she's fighting hardest to keep hidden. What's beyond dispute is that Steve Sawitz never gave permission. His privacy was violated, his words distorted, and his reputation dismantled by headlines based on incomplete evidence. Yet he's the one demanding full disclosure, while the accuser is the one demanding silence. That contrast says everything. When the person recorded in secret insists on transparency, and the person who introduced the recording wants secrecy, it's not hard to see who's confident about what really happened. But this isn't just a moral or a narrative problem for Blake Lively, it's a legal one. Because in California, where this conversation is believed to have taken place, recording someone without their consent isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. California is a strict two-party consent state, meaning both parties must agree before any recording occurs. Steve Sawitz never agreed. That means Blake's evidence may not just be tainted, it could be illegal. And if the court confirms that, the very recording she tried to weaponize might become the proof that destroys her entire case. Steve Sawitz never even knew he was being recorded, which makes the entire audio potentially inadmissible, evidence gathered through illegal means. That means Blake Lively could be using criminally obtained material to build a civil case. But here's where it becomes completely twisted. Blake is now claiming she's protecting privacy by keeping this recording sealed. Whose privacy? The person who secretly recorded someone without consent. That isn't privacy protection, It's evidence tampering dressed up as legal procedure. She violated Sawitz's privacy to create the recording, then invoked privacy law to keep it hidden from scrutiny. The irony is staggering. Blake's entire legal strategy relies on a piece of evidence that might itself violate state and federal wiretapping laws, and she's the one demanding secrecy. Meanwhile, Sawitz, the actual victim of the unauthorized recording, is begging for full transparency. He wants the entire audio released because he knows the unedited version will expose her selective manipulation. Think about this legally. If someone secretly records you without consent in a two-party consent state, that's potentially a crime. If they then use that illegal recording to attack your reputation while concealing the full context, that's evidence manipulation. And if they hide behind privacy claims to stop you from defending yourself with the complete truth, that's weaponizing legal procedure. Wayfair's legal team spelled it out clearly for the court. Blake obtained evidence through possibly illegal means, used it to create sensational headlines, and is now invoking privacy rights she forfeited the moment she recorded their client in secret. They aren't just challenging her narrative, they're exposing her method. What Blake may not have considered is geography. In New York, one-party consent makes secret recording legal. Only one participant has to approve. But if the conversation happened in California and all evidence suggests it did, then Blake has a much bigger problem. California's wiretapping laws require both parties to consent. That means her star witness may have committed a felony to help her case, and Blake's reliance on that evidence could backfire spectacularly. The consent issue devastates her credibility. She spent weeks presenting herself as the victim of retaliation and verbal abuse, but secretly recording private conversations without consent, editing them selectively, and using them to fuel media outrage isn't victim behavior. It's calculated manipulation masquerading as legal advocacy. Steve Sawitz has every right to demand the release of his own recorded words. These aren't Blake's private communications, they're his. She can't claim privacy protection over evidence that violates another person's privacy. She can't invoke secrecy laws to shield herself from accountability after using that same evidence to control headlines. But the consent issue is only the beginning of Blake's unraveling. The way her team is fighting transparency reveals something deeper, a deliberate pattern of narrative control. They aren't just asking the court to keep evidence sealed. They're deploying every procedural trick possible to manage what the public sees and what the press can report. Their desperation is impossible to miss. Her latest filings read like a masterclass in courtroom manipulation disguised as due process. The argument is simple but deceptive. Blake's lawyers claim the full audio must stay sealed to prevent additional media coverage that could be adverse to her. But fear of bad publicity isn't a legal reason to hide evidence. Courts, especially in the Southern District of New York, have rejected that argument countless times. Yet Blake's team continues to push it, as if repetition might make it work. Wayfair's attorneys called it out for exactly what it is: overbroad, calculated obstruction. Blake isn't trying to protect a witness. She's trying to protect her image. Her motion to seal doesn't just cover the witness's name. It seeks to conceal the timing of the meeting, the context of the discussion, and everything that happened before and after the alleged abuse. None of that information would expose anyone's identity, but it would expose whether Blake orchestrated this entire recording after filing her initial claims. In other words, she's asking the court to hide the context that could reveal her own manipulation. Think about the sequence. She filed selective quotes from the recording, triggered a wave of verbal abuse headlines, and let the story spiral across entertainment media. Now that the narrative might be falling apart, she wants the full version buried. That isn't legal strategy. It's PR control disguised as confidentiality. And the most revealing part of her argument? Her team openly admits she created the media storm herself. They acknowledge that the substantial public interest surrounding the case stems from her own decision to include alleged quotations from the tape in her filing. She lit the fire, and now wants legal protection from getting burned. Wayfair's legal response dismantles her position line by line. They argue that her sealing request fails the narrow tailoring rule, meaning she's trying to block far more information than necessary. Most of what she wants hidden doesn't protect anyone's safety. It protects her narrative. The context, the timing, and the lead-up to the conversation would show whether the recording was an opportunistic setup made after Blake's initial filings, or a legitimate piece of pre-existing evidence. That's what she doesn't want the court, or the public, to see, and this is where her legal panic becomes visible. Blake's team knows that if the full recording is released, the comparison between her edited quotes and the original audio could destroy her credibility overnight. They know the timestamps could reveal that the conversation happened after her legal team began preparing filings, implying coordination or fabrication. They know the full dialogue might show that what she labeled verbal abuse was taken out of context entirely. Then there's the most damning admission of all. Blake's argument for sealing rests on her concern about adverse publicity. She isn't claiming safety risks, trade secrets, or witness protection, just embarrassment. But she can invoke privacy over someone else's words, especially when that person is the one demanding transparency. She's trying to control another person's speech while portraying herself as silenced and victimized. The hypocrisy couldn't be clearer. What's emerging is a pattern, one that legal analysts are beginning to describe as strategic opacity. Blake's team leaks partial information to shape the story, hides the rest under claims of confidentiality, and then cries victim when challenged. It's not just about one recording, it's about how she's using the justice system as a stage to manage public perception. But the more she hides, the more obvious the manipulation becomes. Because when the person recorded in secret begs for openness and the accuser begs for silence, it doesn't take a legal degree to know who's telling the truth. Blake's actions in this case reveal a level of manipulation that is both systematic and alarming, as she allegedly creates evidence through questionable, potentially illegal methods, strategically selects portions to craft favorable headlines, and then weaponizes privacy laws to prevent full scrutiny of the truth. Her legal team, rather than protecting a victim, appears to enable large-scale evidence manipulation, operating within a calculated framework that goes far beyond typical courtroom procedures. The next revelations could expose what might be the most meticulously planned media strategy Hollywood has ever witnessed, as accusations of evidence manipulation now extend beyond Wayfair's legal team, emerging from multiple sources in a pattern that is becoming impossible to ignore. Blake's approach to evidence handling in this lawsuit demonstrates a strategic sophistication that suggests careful orchestration. She has previously been caught taking statements out of context, and content creators reporting on the case have faced baseless legal threats from her team accusing them, without proof, of being paid by Justin Baldoni to damage her reputation. If she is willing to levy false claims against journalists, the possibility of evidence manipulation against defendants becomes even more plausible. Central to the controversy is a sealed recording, which seemingly reveals her playbook. First, obtaining evidence through dubious channels. Second, releasing selective clips that generate sensationalized headlines. Third, leveraging legal procedures to obscure the full context that might contradict her narrative. And fourth, adopting a victim persona whenever transparency is demanded. This strategy, though cloaked as legal maneuvering, is essentially manipulation framed as a courtroom technique. What makes this situation particularly disturbing is that Blake's own legal filings indicate concern over potential adverse media coverage if the full recording is disclosed, suggesting she deliberately generated media attention using selective quotes, yet now fears exposure of details that could contradict her claims. Court documents further reveal attempts to conceal specifics about the timing of the meeting and the events leading to the recording, not to protect the witness's identity, but to mask whether Blake orchestrated the recording post-claim, indicating calculated, rather than organic, evidence collection. Wayfair's counterarguments assert that Blake cherry-picked statements to construct a misleading narrative, extracting inflammatory moments from a private conversation to create headlines damaging to their client, while simultaneously obstructing any fact-checking that could challenge her version. This approach is less about legal strategy and more akin to a public relations assault, with the most telling aspect being that Steve Sarowitz, the secretly recorded party, demands full transparency as Blake continues to push for secrecy. When selectively edited statements are used against someone, full disclosure becomes crucial, and Sarowitz's insistence implies that the complete recording likely paints a drastically different picture from the carefully curated snippets released by Blake. Had Sarowitz remained silent, Her selective editing might have gone unnoticed, but his insistence on transparency transforms evidence manipulation into a serious legal liability capable of undermining her entire case. This pattern of manipulation extends beyond a single recording, revealing a comprehensive, deliberate strategy to control public narrative through the intersection of legal procedures and media coverage, with escalating consequences for Blake. Compounding the situation are allegations of judicial bias in her favor, which threaten the credibility of the federal court overseeing the matter. Observers note that Judge Louis Lyman has issued rulings appearing to disproportionately benefit Blake and Ryan Reynolds, prompting questions about judicial integrity. These suspicions are not baseless. Lyman has made several controversial decisions that deviate from established precedent, raising concerns about fairness and impartiality. A particularly revealing instance involved his initial order requiring Katie Cassis and Brianna Costello to hand over documents deemed privileged, only to reverse the decision when Wayfair's attorneys demonstrated that privileged communications included Jed Wallace, a client of the law firm. This reversal calls into question either the judge's initial review process or the potential intention to favor Blake's position without proper legal grounding, both of which cast doubt on impartiality. The timing and consistency of his rulings have fostered a discernible pattern. Requests from Blake's team for sealed documents are often granted, while Wayfair's demands for transparency, grounded in precedent, are delayed or denied. Legal analysts are documenting these tendencies, highlighting the serious ramifications for judicial credibility and the integrity of the entire case. Against this backdrop, Blake's team has argued that Wayfair possessed various forms of evidence, yet the broader pattern suggests a deliberate strategy to control both the narrative and the perception of the facts. By selectively framing incidents, employing aggressive legal tactics, and exploiting gaps in media coverage, Blake has crafted a multi-layered defense that blurs the lines between legal procedure and media manipulation. The case underscores how modern litigation can be intertwined with strategic communications, where courtroom maneuvers are as much about shaping public perception as about establishing legal facts. As the proceedings unfold, the implications of her methods, including selective evidence release, legal obfuscation, and orchestrated media influence, are becoming increasingly apparent, highlighting the precarious balance between legal advocacy and ethical responsibility. Observers note that every selective release, every sealed filing, and every strategic headline seems calculated to maintain a narrative favorable to Blake, while minimizing exposure to scrutiny. If unchecked, this pattern could not only compromise the transparency of the trial, but also set a precedent for how high-profile individuals might manipulate both legal and public arenas to their advantage. The stakes are enormous. Evidence handling, judicial conduct, and media influence intersect in a manner that could redefine expectations of accountability in Hollywood litigation. As more details emerge and demands for full disclosure intensify, the fragile facade of Blake's strategy faces increasing pressure, revealing that her carefully controlled narrative may be far more vulnerable than her team has suggested, and that the cumulative effect of these manipulations could ultimately jeopardize both the case and the broader perception of legal fairness in high-profile disputes. Judge Lyman's repeated rulings in favor of Blake, even when procedural objections from the opposing side were raised, have created a growing appearance of bias, whether intentional or not. Wayfair had argued that the new privilege logs were being filed too late, but the judge allowed them anyway, seemingly disregarding the objection. Such consistent preferential rulings fuel perceptions that the court is not impartial, and when a federal judge feels compelled to publicly deny corruption allegations, it underscores how seriously his credibility is being questioned. Once judicial integrity is in doubt, every subsequent decision is scrutinized for favoritism, with observers questioning whether established legal precedent will be followed or if rulings will be bent to protect one party. In this case, every procedural decision, from evidence handling to sealing orders, is now interpreted through the lens of potential bias, creating enormous chaos for the legal process. The stakes are heightened because Judge Lyman also controls whether Blake's secret recording is unsealed, the very piece of evidence that could expose manipulation and misrepresentation. Given his track record of favorable rulings for Blake, Wayfair has every reason to fear that their case will not receive an even-handed review. However, Judicial bias may ultimately prove to be only a secondary concern. The real threat lies in the content of the recording itself. If unsealed, it could completely dismantle Blake's narrative, undermining the foundation of her legal strategy. Her case is heavily reliant on portraying herself as a victim of retaliation for speaking out about workplace misconduct, yet if the recording shows her selectively editing Steve Sarawitz's statements, misrepresenting his words, or taking comments out of context to create damaging headlines, her credibility as a reliable witness would collapse entirely. The implications extend far beyond this single piece of evidence, casting doubt on every claim she has made throughout the litigation. The timing of the recording could be equally devastating, potentially revealing whether her version of events was coordinated or manipulated after the fact. Such a revelation would not merely challenge the integrity of the secret recording, it could trigger a domino effect that calls into question all aspects of her case against Justin Baldoni and Wayfair Studios. In essence, the release of this recording could expose a calculated strategy to control narrative and evidence, transforming what might have been a high-profile legal dispute into a catastrophic unraveling of Blake's credibility and legal standing, with consequences that extend far beyond this single trial, threatening her reputation, her legal positioning, and the very story she has spent months carefully constructing.